Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we are opening up the files on the absolute limits of human psychology, human history, and raw, unfiltered survival. We're going to be looking really closely at the extreme dualities of the mind. Specifically, this fascinating paradox of its terrifying fragility on one hand and its unimaginable resilience on the other. I want you to imagine a world where your own mind actually turns against you. Just picture a scenario where your brain becomes a deadly enemy, completely taking over your physical actions and forcing you to dance relentlessly, endlessly, until your heart literally bursts. I mean, it sounds like the plot of a psychological horror movie, right? But now let's contrast that scenario with another extreme. Imagine that same human mind, your mind, suddenly becoming so absolutely unbreakable that it allows you to survive in a literal frozen hell for 72 days. Think about a mind that forces you to adapt, pushing you to make the darkest choices imaginable just to keep your physical body alive against literally all the odds of nature. So the crucial question we have to ask ourselves is, what actually happens when normal people are pushed to the absolute edge? What happens when all the comforts, the daily structures, and the rules of modern life are just completely stripped away and we're left with absolutely nothing but our raw psychology? Well, that is exactly the mystery we're unpacking in today's Explainer. Part 1. The Fragile Mind. The Dancing Plague of 1518. We're starting our journey by exploring the incredible psychological extremes of human fragility, heading way back in time to uncover one of the most bizarre and, frankly, fatal events ever recorded. Back in July 1518, right in the streets of Strasbourg, France, a woman named Frau Trophea stepped out of her house and just began to dance fervently. And this brilliantly illustrates the terrifyingly rapid spread of this deadly compulsion. Because within just one single week of her first step, 34 completely normal people had joined her in the streets. And within a month, that manic crowd had exploded to over 400 people. Now, the physical toll here was just unimaginable. You have to understand this wasn't some fun festival. There was absolutely no music. There was no celebration. These people danced for days without stopping, under a brutal, burning summer sun. Their feet were literally bleeding. Their bones were fracturing under the relentless physical stress, but they simply could not stop. The manic energy of this event was entirely lethal, with dozens of people dropping dead every single day from massive strokes, heart attacks, and just sheer bodily exhaustion. You're probably wondering, how does something like this even happen? Well, modern scientists actually call this psychogenic illness, or you might know it as mass hysteria. Under extreme social stress, like the widespread famine and disease that were rampant at the time, the human brain can trigger a massive collective delusion. It really proves just how terrifyingly fragile the human mind actually is. I mean, it can literally catch a psychological virus, completely copying and spreading deadly behaviors over and over until the human body just gives out and drops dead. But to truly understand the mind, we have to look at the exact opposite end of the spectrum. We're executing a sharp thematic pivot here. We're leaving behind the intense heat, the panic, and the sheer madness of the burning streets of 1518 France, and we're traveling to the freezing, silent, almost total isolation of the peaks of the Andes Mountains in 1972. Part 2. The Unbreakable Mind. Miracle in the Andes. We're now shifting our focus to a solemn, incredibly heavy story of extreme survival. A story where, completely unlike in France, the human mind absolutely refused to break. 11,000. That is the altitude, in feet, where a plane carrying a young Uruguayan rugby team violently crashed into the unforgiving mountains in October of 1972. Out of the 45 passengers on board that fateful flight, only a quarter of them even survived the initial brutal impact and the terrifying avalanches that followed shortly after. And then, those survivors woke up to this reality. Minus 30 degrees Celsius. That's the deadly temperature they were suddenly stranded in. Think about this for a second. These were young men wearing nothing but summer clothes, completely surrounded by snow and ice with absolutely zero food. For weeks, they waited and prayed for a rescue, holding on to whatever hope they could, until they learned the unthinkable news on a makeshift radio. The search had been called off. They were entirely alone. Which brings us to a reality that is incredibly heavy, but it's absolutely vital to understanding true human resilience. To stay alive, these civilized, normal young men had to face the ultimate psychological shift. Their primal survival instinct had to completely rewrite human morality. They had to make the agonizing, incredibly dark decision to survive by eating the frozen bodies of their own deceased friends and teammates just to avoid starvation. But here's the thing. Instead of breaking down into pure chaos or turning into monsters, consider what they actually accomplished. They fostered an unbreakable society. They formed a highly organized, cooperative system right there inside the wreckage of the plane. Two of those survivors, Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa, undertook an impossible mission. They walked for 10 grueling days through the deathly, freezing mountains without any climbing gear whatsoever, just to find help. And because of that awe-inspiring resilience, 16 people ultimately walked out alive. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that number right there, 72. That is 72 entire days surviving in absolute hell. That's over 2 months of fighting the harshest elements on planet Earth, fighting off starvation and battling their own profound psychological limits. And yet, incredibly, their minds did not snap.
Part 3. The Thin Line of Civilization.
Okay, let's pull back from these two really intense historical accounts for a minute and summarize our core lesson here. What do these extreme events, one of a bizarre dancing plague and one of brutal mountain survival, actually teach us about the very nature of our own minds? Well, the human mind is fundamentally a paradox. On one side, we see its terrifying fragility, a mind that's capable of catching a psychological virus and snapping into deadly madness simply from social stress and panic. But on the exact opposite side, we see its unbreakable resilience, a mind that's capable of rewriting its deepest moral codes and conquering the coldest mountains against all odds of nature. And this brings all of that history right to your doorstep. Because the truth is, we are all just one extreme situation away from discovering who we truly are. We like to think we're safely governed by the rules and the nice comforts of modern life, don't we? But the line between our highly civilized world and raw, primal survival is so much thinner than you might think. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought today. Who are you when pushed to the absolute edge? If all the comforts of your life just vanished tomorrow, would your mind break into that fragile madness? Or would you find that unbreakable core deep inside yourself? Thank you so much for exploring these incredible extremes of the human archive with me in this explainer today. Keep questioning everything, and I'll catch you in the next one.